1, 2, 3, 4. I told you so. I told you. I told you so. I told you. Yeah. Remember when I told you about 9/11? Remember when I told you about Building 7? Remember when I told you about the fluoride in the water? Yes, I did.
You got a drinking problem.
Remember when I told you about the New World Order?
That was me.
Remember that? Remember when I told you about the chemtrails in the sky? Remember when I told you that NASA was full of lies? Remember when I told you about the ultra mind control? Well, I just want to say that I told you so, yeah.
And don't let me be the one to tell you in the end that I told you so.
Oh, well, I just want to go over a couple things on this last live that Rich and myself and Pamela and Annie, we all know who Annie is, but she doesn't want us to making sense to me. But hey, I maintained I kept myself together on this one for a reason. Some things I didn't mention. I was asked to not mention Dennis Stahl. That's really touchy. So already I was limited as to what I could debate on the case, because they was asking me not to mention this, even though it was mentioned in court. Doesn't want to aggravate Danelle with that. Rich he started out with saying, hey, this is rated G, blah, blah, blah. We're going to have it. And nobody, I didn't raise my voice once. And Rich dropped about 5 F-bombs after he made a point to say, hey, we're going to do this G-rated. And he said the word come. And Cathy jetted. But at any rate, there's a couple different things on this that I'm going to go through, because I want to be sure in standing. I want people to get under this video and tell us what made more sense, the non-support side or the support side. What made more sense? What made more logic? So one of the things that Cathy said, I'll just play it.
Truth, once she was convicted or arrested, nobody else was investigated. And even if they were investigating them and found them involved in other stuff.
See how she contradicts herself right off the bat? She said, once she was convicted, they never investigated anyone else. And if they investigated someone else, all right? Well, here's the thing, Annie. Once someone is convicted, it's not up to them to go out and look for other things, even though they did. They did look at other areas. And Rich can tell you that. But it's not up to the law enforcement after her conviction to go out and look at other things. No. Once she's convicted, it's the defense's problem to go hire a private investigator instead of, I don't know, maybe buying another new Corvette for the Corvette Club and driving around in it. But the thing could be the defense side is the side that has to, after the conviction, they have to prove that conviction was wrong. That's why they didn't go out and investigate anybody after she was convicted. Sometimes you got to use your brain a little bit. But at any rate,
they couldn't bring them up or release their name in regards to the Routier case because you cannot cause, that would be slander. That's guilt by association.
That would be slander. Okay, she said if the police went and questioned some people about this murder, that would be slander, right? Well, slander doesn't seem to be an issue with the supporter side of the Darlie Routier case. I've heard Danelle say that Tom Bevel is the type of person that for the right amount of money, he'll swing it your way. I called Tom Bevel's office about that because that's slander. That's slander. The nurses have been slandered on the other side. The doctors have been slandered. Jimmy Patterson has been slandered. Slander, slander, slander. So we need to practice what we preach.
So just, I promise you, you will never get 100% of a police investigation. The stuff they rule out, you don't get.
Do you see, Rich, where she said they never investigate? You will get 100% of any police investigation. It's the FOIA, F-O-I-A. You can go down and file a FOIA report on any police activity anywhere and get those reports.
Remember the document? Do you remember the document that I showed you of all the people that they looked at afterwards? Brian, you talked to one of the guys.
I talked to one of them, yeah, but he did not want to talk about it.
They most certainly did look at other
people. He was
people.
still nervous after he said, well, I lived right up the street.
That lived in the area.
Yeah.
Right, but you're not, but as far as they canvass the neighborhood, so if you talk to other people that live nearby, then most certainly you know they got spoken to. But that doesn't mean that they were a suspect.
Surveyed the neighborhood during the investigation before the conviction. You contradict yourself quite a bit, Annie.
They could not, just like I promise you in the BTK killing in the Green River, before they actually caught the guy.
I know, even on the Lisa Gibbons show, they said, look, we're not talking about them down the street here. Cathy has an issue with bringing up other cases.
They had a long list of suspects. They had people they were investigating.
So that means
when the trials came up, they didn't bring up those other people's names.
So that means that they would be looking at more people than just Darlie if there was a long list of people.
The point being made.
She started out by saying the police didn't investigate after. And then we proved that the police did investigate after. She had no retort to that. None.
They looked at several other people.
I talked to one of them, and that guy's under a federal RICO act right now. I can see why they looked at him. You know, and interestingly, he owns an exotic. Now, she's not doubling down on what she said that started this conversation, is that they didn't investigate any further. We proved that she did. They did. After the conviction. We proved they did just now. And she's not retorting it. Car company, which makes me wonder who that dealer was that called Darlie.
Well, that they gathered his fingerprint too, if I recall.
A bunch of fingerprints.
Yes, yeah. It wasn't just him, it was several.
But,
a lot of them.
But okay, here's the thing. All right, let's take it from square.
Even Rich agrees that after the conviction, they were still taking fingerprints on somebody. Cathy was wrong.
Initially, Cron goes in, he does the walkthrough, which is very standard in something like this. And he come up with a conclusion at 20, 30 minutes after the walkthrough. He felt as though it was an inside job. He didn't.
It wasn't a conclusion, though. You said he came with the conclusion. When Cron gets there, I reread his testimony just to be sure. When Cron got there, before he started his walkthrough, he was briefed by Walling, Waddell, and another officer that walked with him. They were saying, well, she said that she was over here, and he went over there, and the guy ran out. And her story didn't look right to him from what he was hearing. Now, years later, 30 years later, we have thousands upon thousands of people who believe that her story wasn't right. Are all these people wrong? He didn't come to that conclusion. He said that I believe, or I think, the evidence, this indicates to me that what I've seen so far, that there is no intruder. And he was dead on, absolutely 100% correct.
Name names, anything like that. At that time, when Darlie was in the hospital, she said that when she was being questioned, I believe it was by Detective Patterson, I think.
It was by Detective Patterson, and Frost was behind him taking notes.
Somebody correct me if I'm incorrect on that, please. Yeah, well, she said she could clearly tell that they were indicating Darren in this thing just by the question she was getting asked. And
now you got to understand that Frosh and Jimmy Patterson were at the hospital before they went to the house.
she, if this was some type of spousal retribution, which I've often heard said, why wouldn't Darlie said, yeah, I see my husband. It was
I
my
believe
husband.
that questioning went on before Patterson went to the house to talk with Cron. So initially,
they were all talking, Mr.
When Cron, Patterson went to the hospital first, I think.
Yeah, anyway, I think it was him. Yeah.
When Cron walked through there, he's got this cop in his ear. She said this. Look at this. He looks. He sees things. So he doesn't just walk through there and say, "Oh no, this." He saw things that indicated to him that there was no intruder. And to this day, we still are debating. So his intuition couldn't have been that far off. We're still debating. Who is this intruder? To him, it looked like there was no intruder. And to hundreds of thousands of people or lots of people today, it still looks like there was no intruder. You notice how Cathy's being real quiet because this part of the conversation was started with, well, they didn't even investigate any further. And we clarified it. Pam clarified it. I clarified it. And Rich clarified it. So she was wrong. So was Cron wrong?
I highly disagree.
Well, I know there are a lot of people that believe that there was no intruder. Professional people, we've talked to, cops and others. So was Cron that far off if it still stands true today? Was his intuition not that? Was it bad?
Yeah, I think
if there was all. Now, Rich is going to say he thinks that that Cron's intuition that there was no intruder is bad. But to this day, they have not proved or shown that there was an intruder in that house. She is sitting in prison today because there was no intruder. And Rich disagrees. And that's fine to disagree. All kinds of evidence of an intruder being in there, and Cron said that, I would be like, man, you're stupid.
Look, all I'm saying is he's making assumptions like that and telling other police officers and investigators and detectives.
Actually, no. They were telling him what they thought as he was walking through there. If you read his testimony, you'll see that.
It's an inside job. And naturally, in a case like this, I think everybody in the house should be suspect until they're no longer suspect. So I think they were right by doing that, just because of the circumstances and the situation.
Well, we contend that Darlie's in prison because there was no intruder, and that's what James Cron thought. And it's not just him.
How hard were they looking, Mr.
Well, you had the University of Indiana. How hard were they looking? He just described there was this fingerprint list that had a whole bunch of people's names on it that lived in the area that had trouble. Rich is aware of it. That's how far they were looking. Indiana, ISU for Indiana, the crime, the criminal case. Now notice I bring up the Facebook page, ISU for Indiana, which Cathy took it over. And I asked why the criminal justice program at Indiana University that came out really strong about, we're going to Darlie this, Darlie that. And then within a couple months, they saw that she was guilty. And they fucking jetted. And Cathy's taking over that group. She doesn't say a thing about it. They did take on David Cam and Darlie's case. And they even started a Facebook for Darlie. And they came out strong with Bill Clutter, and they came out strong for Darlie. And David Cam, when he got out, he was supposed to crack this case open and get her out of there. And once the ISU started looking at the case in depth, they abandoned the whole Facebook page. It's from Cathy. It's gone. And David Cam, what happened? Bill Clutter, and he owned Injustice Anywhere. Why did they back away?
I don't know.
Because these are professional people. Bill Clutter was a former sheriff, ran for Senate, and started a foundation, Injustice Anywhere. And I was just in email conversations with him the other day, not too long ago. I could share them if you'd like, but I wondered why. I asked him why he abandoned it, and he had no answer. Because he was the one that said, "We're coming out strong. We're raising the bar." He said this publicly. Didn't last a year, and Rich just said he gave the answer. I don't know. The answer is the same thing as David Cam was a former Indiana State Trooper who was accused and convicted for killing his wife and 2 kids. After 3 different trials, he was exonerated completely. So Bill Clutter honed in on him and asked him if he would take a look at Darlie's case. And before David Cam can make a public statement about it, he said, "Yeah, David Cam, we're going to get him out here, and he's going to show you that Darlie's innocent." And David Cam took one look at the case and jetted. Well, I can say David Cam back quick because he's a cop.
What timing was that? Did they give up the case after the IP took it? Was it shortly afterwards?
Cam and them gave up the case back in 20.
That was years ago.
David Cam, who went through 3 different trials to prove himself wrongfully convicted of killing his wife and 2 kids. Now look how informative I am. And Cathy's just ain't got nothing to say. He had to stare at the guy that actually did that while he was in prison. But he got himself out after 3 trials. Bill Clutter, he ran for state senate. He failed, but he owned Injustice Anywhere. They came out really strong. They were promoting Darlie. David Cam, when he gets out, he's going to step up for her. David Cam said, "Whoa, I never said that." And then they all went away. ISU, University of Indiana, like I said, they had that page, and it only lasted 9 or 10 months, and they just abandoned it. These are college kids. This is something about a college that we can verify happened. These criminal justice kids, they were all for Darlie, and then after a while, I was like, I don't know. Then it was like, no way. And then I was like, I'm out of here. How does that happen?
Same with UNT. And also, as far as they didn't investigate anything else, look at all the samples that were taken for DNA testing.
Look at how much further we're proving Darlie that Cathy wrong. Remember, she said they didn't investigate anywhere after Darlie's conviction. She's had more DNA testing done in her case than any other death row inmate in the history of Texas law. But Cathy wants you to believe that they didn't investigate any further. They've been investigating for 29 years.
Tiny hairs that were collected that Darlie's leaning on as evidence of an intruder. Tiny hairs that were collected. Fibers that were, shoe fibers that were collected from Darren's sock. All kinds of little pieces of trace evidence. All kinds of blood evidence, blood drop, collected, cut, to say that they just zeroed in on Darlie is wrong.
All right, now hold on, because you're bringing up a good point, Mrs. Collins. I want to bring up the blood map, and I want to discuss a couple things on there. I just got to find it because
That's just one part where that I was able to, with the facts single-handedly, and Pam was able to prove that Cathy Ramsey was wrong. There's several other different parts in through here. Well, I can explain the part where she said that there was film footage of Darlie being placed in the stretcher and in the ambulance. And I was like, nah, I don't think so, because UNT, University of Northern Texas, in their digital library, they have every clip from FAA, all the Dallas and Texas news areas that studied that case. They've got every clip. I've seen just about every single clip, and that one wasn't in there. And, Cathy didn't say anything. She said, "Oh, I saw it. It was on the news." Okay. So that would mean that I read the testimony of all the first responders to find this. You know, you have Cathy or Karen Neal and Terry Neal going across the street. You have Walling saying that he stopped them from going across the street. She said, I'm a nurse, and then they went across the street. The ambulance that Darlie went in was in front of the house, right? And so if a news crew was there, they would have seen the brief on the porch where Darlie came out on the porch. In one part of her testimony, she said she was sitting down. They said Darlie came out on the porch, and then somebody lifted her up. Darren's talking to her. We got to find out who did this. You got to promise me, blah, blah, blah. And then Darren tried to get in the ambulance with Darlie, and they told him no, they didn't have room. But the news footage didn't catch that because there was no news footage out there on that scene that fast. There was none. I asked Vasha. There was none when Darlie was coming out the door. What she has confused is the footage of Devin being taken out about 1:30 on June the 6th, 1:30 in between 1:30 and 2 o'clock. He was taken out. But that wasn't an ambulance. That was a white hearse. And you would know that wasn't Darlie because his head was covered up. So I want to challenge anybody anywhere. Find that footage that Cathy says she saw of Darlie being pushed into the stretcher, into the ambulance. Because it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. So I wonder, I even asked Rich later, why would she say that? Because Rich even knows that there was no news crew out there when Darlie was getting put on. And Rich just told me, I don't know why she said that. He didn't back it up or... So these are the lengths that these people will go to. They'll start, if you start to talk and make a point, they'll go, hey, or this is the one, through this one, whenever we were making strong points, she said, hey. Anger. The first stage of denial is anger. Anger. Can anybody see in that video if there was any evidence of anger? Remember, justice for Devin and Damon.